Om Sarashasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahayi Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahayi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome back, and welcome to all of you watching this class online. We continue with our study of Uddhava Gita. We've actually, finished the contents of chapter 5, in which Sri Krishna gives a scathing criticism of the foolishness it is to look for perfect peace, contentment, and happiness outside. By looking for peace, happiness, contentment through ordinary, worldly activities, or even trying to find it in the next life by going to some kind of heavenly domain. Sri Krishna says, well, he would say if he spoke American English, you're wasting your time. And all of that discussion was for the sake of cultivating vairagya. Vairagya means dispassion, and it's a particular kind of dispassion based on discernment. Dispassion based on discernment of the futility of finding perfect peace and contentment through these human endeavors. So, Sri Krishna then has concluded all that criticism, and now at the end of chapter 5, we come to a question raised by Uddhava, which is a little unusual, you might think, to have a question at the end of the chapter. You know, many of the chapters in the Bhagavad Gita open with Arjuna's questions. Not all of the chapters, many of the chapters in the Bhagavad Gita open with Arjuna's question. Here we have a chapter ending with Uddhava's question. And if you wonder why this happens, the reason is the author probably doesn't determine chapter boundaries. Chapter boundaries are probably fixed by a later editor. We know that these scriptures undergo development as they're passed down from generation to generation. So if Veda Vyasa, or some Vyasa, is the author of this Bhagavata Purana, then we might presume some later scholar created these chapter divisions. Okay. Before we see the Uddhava's question, there was one question by email that came with regard to what we saw in last week's class. We were talking about raga and dvesha, and how in the presence of raga and dvesha, you lose your inner freedom. Raga and dvesha are compulsions. You are compelled by raga dvesha to chase after what you want, to run away from what you don't want. If they're truly compulsions, then where is your inner freedom? So in the final verses, we saw how Sri Krishna described that true inner freedom is a result of being free from raga and dvesha. So the question then is, But once you have conquered raga and dvesha, then there will be no desire, no binding desires, no compelling desires. So when you have no desire, then what is there to choose? And what is the point of free will? When you are free from raga and dvesha, what is there to choose? So imagine being free from raga dvesha, going to a restaurant, and the waiter comes and says, what would you like for dinner? And you say, I have, I have no raga dvesha. I don't care. What will you eat? Koi bhi, anything. That's not how it works, right? Remember, raga and dvesha are these compulsions. And my guru called them he called them binding desires, as opposed to non-binding desires that we often call preferences. So when you asked my guru, what would you like to drink? He would say coffee, because he preferred coffee. No raga and dvesha there. It simply is a matter of preference. So when you conquer raga and dvesha, you still have natural preferences, and you use your free will for the sake of those preferences. So one more subtle point here, and that is, in the presence of raga dvesha, you have free will. But here's a kind of an ironic observation. I don't know if we've ever talked about this before. So you have free will, but because of raga and dvesha, you are compelled to use your free will, right? So if you're compelled to use it, is it really free? Interesting. If you're compelled to use your free will, how free is it? Only when you are free of raga and dvesha, then you're free to use your free will for the sake of preferences, or you're free not to use your free will. What is it at the restaurant? What is your dish of the day? That is, you don't have to make a choice. You can choose not to choose. That's truly free will. So that is the question. Now, let us return to our text and see. This is Uddhava's question at the conclusion of chapter 5. Uddhava Uvacha, Guneshu vartamanopi, deha jeshvanapavrataha, gunarna badhyate dehi, badhyate va katam vibho, badhyate va katam bhavo. You notice I've put in these numbers 1 and 2 because there are 2 questions, but it's broken amongst the first and second halves. You'll see how it works. I just put it together for you. So, Uddhava's question. Guneshu vartamanaha api, one who is vartamanaha, engaged in worldly affairs, api, even while one is engaged in worldly affairs, guneshu, functioning with the help of the gunas. So gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, but what's significant here is tamas. You exist along with these gunas. The guna of tamas, the principle of darkness and lethargy, is responsible for ignorance. So we discussed in the prior part of this chapter again and again how raga and dvesha are due to ignorance. Is it not so? Because these compulsions, you are compelled to run away from what you don't want because you think it can really hurt you. You are compelled to chase after what you want because you think it can really help you. But from the standpoint of Atma, your true self, Satchidananda, pure consciousness, can you improve upon that consciousness? Can that consciousness get hurt? So from that lofty spiritual perspective, there's no need for raga and dvesha. These compulsions fall away. These compulsions are due to the gunas in general and to tamas, tamoguna in particular. So one who exists with these gunas, engaged in these worldly activities, guneshu, which are dehajeshu, these gunas which are born of the body and mind, associated with the body and mind, not Atma. Atma is nirguna, that's another big topic, but body and mind certainly affected by gunas, and especially this guna of tamas, which is the root of ignorance. So what about this person? Now we have to skip over some words and go down to the third line. That dehi, that person who is under the influence of these gunas, along with ignorance. What about that person? That dehi badhyate, is bound. And then we can bring up the word katam. How? I'm sorry, na badhyate, you have to bring in that na also. Na bad katam, na, sorry. Katam na badhyate. How can that person not be bound? How can that person be freed from bondage? So Uddhava finds himself with a body, finds himself with a mind, and finds himself with raga and dvesha, just like you might find yourself with a body and mind and raga and dvesha. And Uddhava, based on the prior teachings, he understands that all of this comes along, comes along with the package, they say. It's a package deal, and the package deal is where you have the gunas, you have tamas, you have ignorance. That ignorance which leads to raga dvesha leading to bondage. So Uddhava naturally asks, how can you break free from that bondage as long as you have gunas, as long as you have a body and mind? How do you break free from the gunas? How do you break free from the bondage caused by raga dvesha? That's question 1. Question 2 starts with that word anapavritaha. And again, the dehi, a person, this is question number 2. Dehi, a person who is anapavritaha. It's a double negative. And those are always confusing. And the na below is also present. So my translation, I think, simplifies it a lot. How can a person who is without association, avritaha, is associated with these gunas? What about a person who is not associated with these gunas? How can that person, in the last line, actually the word gunaihi in the third line, you can see how you have to be like a contortionist with such verses. You have to link up all of these words properly. Gunaihi avritaha, one who is associated with the gunas, But here, na, the one who is not associated with the gunas, how can that person badyate va? How can that person be bound? Vibho, O Krishna, katam, how can that be? So these are actually two sides of the same question. And it's not as the verse is complicated, but the questions are not. The question is basically, O Krishna, when one is associated with the gunas, how can there be freedom? And if one is not associated with the gunas, if one has overcome raga and dvesha, then can that person be subject to bondage again in the future? Once you have gained knowledge, once you have been enlightened, can you become unenlightened, so to speak? The flip side of his question is, one who is liberated, is that person subject to bondage again? And then in the next verse, Uddhava expands a little bit on his question. Katam varteta viharet, katam varteta viharet, karvajñāyeta lakshanaihi, karvajñāyeta lakshanaihi, kim bhunjitota visrajet, kim bhunjitota visrajet, chayita sita yativa, chayita sita yativa. So Uddhava is curious about these two people, one who is bound by the gunas and one who is freed from bondage. And he asks about these two people, katam varteta, how would each of them behave? Viharet, how would they conduct themselves in day-to-day life? How would the mukta, the enlightened person, behave? And how would the baddha, the one who is bound, behave? Kairvajñāyeta lakshanaihi. Kaihi lakshanaihi. By what characteristics, by what signs, jñāyeta, would each of them be known? How could you identify a person who is enlightened? How can you identify a person who is bound? This may remind you a little bit of Arjuna's question. Sthita prajñasya ka bhāsha. How that enlightened person, how would they speak? How would they walk and talk? That comes towards the end of chapter 2, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. And very similarly here, kim bhunjita, how would each of them eat? Almost like Arjuna. Kim visrajet. Actually, interesting. Visrajet literally means to excrete. To eat and excrete. We are biological beings. Just like a cell eats and excretes, we have billions of cells, but we also eat and excrete. So anyway, this is Uddhava's kind of biological question. How does that enlightened person behave? How does a bound person behave? Not only that, kim, and that cha is sha, changes due to grammar. Kim shayita, how would that person lay down? Kim asita, how would that person sit? Huh? And kim yati, how would that person go? These are odd questions, just like Arjuna's questions were equally odd. How would that person speak? How would that person move, etc.? And also, how would that person sit? Arjuna also asked. This question about behavior shows that many people in ancient times and even today have some fanciful ideas about the behavior of an enlightened person. So the enlightened person will walk with his or her feet not quite touching the floor and a body not quite touching the seat. Silly, right? With children, I used to ask the children, does an enlightened person glow in the dark? How's that? Kids like that one. You get the point. Enlightenment is not about how you behave. Enlightenment is about what's inside. In specific, in particular, do you suffer? Suffering is due to bondage, and freedom is the absence of suffering. In fact, mukti, freedom, means freedom from suffering. Not only freedom from rebirth means you don't suffer in the next life, but even in this life, freedom from suffering. Can you tell that by looking at a person, whether they have enlightenment or not? To be honest, you have no way of knowing whether or not a person is enlightened, not through behavior. Maybe if that person teaches in a certain way, you might be able to make out. But just how they walk and move and eat and sleep, that won't tell you anything at all. And this reminds us, and I've given this example recently, the example of the Zen master teaching his young disciple. Zen master says, when I was a student like you, I used to chop wood and carry water. The Zen master says, now, meaning now that I'm enlightened and probably quite a bit older, the Zen master says, what do? I chop wood, I carry water. Clearly, it's not a matter of behavior. It's an inner transformation, not an outer transformation. Now, Uddhava concludes this question. Etadachyuta me bruhi, etadachyuta me bruhi, prashnam prashnavidam vara, prashnam prashnavidam vara, nitya mukto nitya baddhaha, nitya mukto nitya baddhaha, eka he veti me brahmaha, eka he veti me brahmaha. Achyuta, O Krishna. Later he says, prashna vidam vara, the best answerer of questions. Prashna vidam vara. He says, O Krishna, me bruhi, tell me, etat, this, tell me this, prashnam, give me the answer to this question. What is the question? Comes in the second half. Nitya muktaha, one who is eternally free, and one who is nitya baddhaha, eternally bound, ekaha eva iti me brahmaha. They ekaha eva me. They look the same to me. And this is me brahmaha. This is my confusion. Why does the enlightened person still behave more or less like the unenlightened person? I don't see any difference in their behavior. This is like Arjuna's confusion too. How do you know? Are they really enlightened? Are they really bound? Or you could even turn the question around like this. If you still are chopping wood and carrying water, then what is the benefit of spiritual practice? That's a good question. Spiritual practice doesn't put an end to worldly responsibilities. What is the advantage? You've heard me talk about that metaphor before, and that is that when the master was a young student, he used to complain endlessly about how much wood he had to chop and how much water he had to carry. Now It's okay. He doesn't care. It's not a burden. It doesn't make him suffer. So the point here is that's not visible from his behavior. It's an inner transformation. And this leads to Uddhava's question. I don't see any change in behavior, so how do I know the difference between one who is mukta, freed, and one who is baddha, bound? Now, the commentator observes that the next chapter, in chapter 6, Sri Krishna begins his answer. And the commentator observes that Sri Krishna doesn't exactly answer this question about behavior because it's kind of trite. So Sri Krishna's response in the next chapter is much deeper. I said before, the chapter opens with a bang. And much deeper because there's another way of interpreting Uddhava's question. And the commentator says, the Sridhar Swami, who is a commentator on the Bhagavata Purana, he observes that if, and this is a really solid, good argument, if you become free, mukta, if you become free, that means enlightenment takes place at a point in time. Enlightenment has a beginning. And one thing we know, that anything that begins has an end. Correct? This is logic, simple logic. Anything that begins has an end. Logicians will actually show you how you have no choice but to come to that conclusion. When there is a beginning, any beginning is the end of the prior state. The prior state comes to an end, a new state begins, demonstrating that beginnings are invariably associated with endings. So the commentator observes, hey, wait a minute, if moksha begins, if you gain moksha, then you can lose moksha. Anything that begins can come to an end. And this is a common problem. Many, many people think that moksha is a state of mind, a blissful state of mind. A blissful state of mind is preceded by normal state of mind, anxiety, hurt, frustration, everything else. So that is the prior state of mind, which comes to an end when the blissful state of mind begins. But tell me, is it possible to have a permanent state of mind? No. So if enlightenment is the arising of a blissful state of mind, absolutely it's going to come to an end. That's a potent question. That question is implied by Uddhava's question. Also, the behavior part is there, but the more profound aspect of this question is this. He's asking about bondage and moksha. And what is moksha is the topic that Sri Krishna addresses at the very beginning of chapter 6. What is bondage? What is moksha? And let us see Sri Krishna's description. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Baddho Mukto Hiti Vyakya, Baddho Mukto. I'm sorry, I didn't advance the slide. Listen. Baddho Muktayati Vyakya, Baddho Muktayati Vyakya, Gunato Mena Vastutaha, Gunato Mena Vastutaha, gunasya maya mulatvan, gunasya maya mulatvan, na me moksho na bandhanam, na me moksho na bandhanam. Good. So Sri Krishna begins, this is what I said, he begins with a bang. He says, bandhaha muktaha iti, bondage and moksha, liberation, freedom from suffering, iti vyakya. This description, using the words bondage and moksha, this vyakya, this mode of communication, this kind of description, this definition, that's a good translation. This definition is given gunataha, me gunataha, is given according to my gunas, according to the gunas. Gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, according to that standpoint of the three gunas, and Sri Krishna includes me guna, my gunas, is kind of calling attention to the fact that he is indeed this avatara. So that's not the theme right here. So he says, based on the perspective of gunas, we speak of bondage and moksha, but na vastutaha, but not in reality. He's saying that bondage and moksha is a perspective, a worldly perspective. Gunataha means according to gunas. The world is trigunatmaka. The world is composed of these three gunas. So gunataha could be translated from a worldly perspective. So bondage and moksha are understood, bondage and moksha are understood from a worldly perspective. Na vastutaha. Bondage and moksha don't exist in reality. Say what? That's what he said. Na vastutaha. Bondage and moksha don't actually exist. That's starting off with a bang. And he explains how that is so. He says, gunasya maya mulatvat. Because the gunas that comprise the world, the gunas from which standpoint we talk about bondage and moksha, all of that is maya mula. It has a state of having its mula here means origin. Its origin, its cause is maya. All of it is maya, mayika. Please don't translate maya as illusion. It's much more profound than that, and I think we're going to have to take some time this morning to understand what is maya. Just let's finish the verse first. So all of this worldly perspective is a perspective which is born of maya. The existence of bondage and moksha, liberation, also from a worldly perspective, a perspective which is due to maya, and then he just to make his point very clear, he says, "Me, for me, as far as I'm concerned, na mokshaha na bandhanam." For me, there's no moksha, there's no bondage. From my perspective, Sri Krishna says, there is no such thing as bondage and moksha. He's saying they don't exist. And that seems counterintuitive. If bondage and moksha don't exist, then what are we doing here today, right? Fine, bondage and moksha don't exist. Do you suffer? That's why we're here today. If you suffer, these teachings are valuable to you. But here he's pointing out a common confusion. we take bondage and moksha as being more real than they actually are. And this is a very abstract idea, what I'm just saying, more real than they actually are. He says that they are maya mula, the result of maya. Why don't we take a few moments to understand what is maya and how. Let me go to the board, I think is the best way to do this. Good. You need to press. You did it right. Very good. I'm impressed. Look, you have to push the right buttons, and if you push the wrong buttons, it's all it's all a mess. And anyway, we're in good shape here. So, Maya, if you look, like any word you look up in a dictionary, lots of meanings. Yes, one meaning is illusion. Yes, another meaning is magic. Are we studying magic here? And even illusion is not the Vedantic use of Maya. So elsewhere, Maya can mean illusion, fine. But in the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, especially as taught by Shankaracharya and his disciples, Maya does not mean illusion. What does it mean? And you may have heard long ago when we were studying the middle chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, I defined Maya as a creative capacity through which Ishvara gives rise to the universe. And this deals with the fact that in Advaita Vedanta, there's no Dvaita, no duality. What do we see around us is only duality. Do you see any non-duality around you? It's all duality. So how do we explain how this world of duality arises from non-dual Brahman? Must be something special that causes a world of duality to arise from non-dual Brahman. Something special, something amazing, something powerful. Maya, best understood as a creative capacity wielded by Ishvara So Ishvara, and notice the language, Ishvara wields Maya to create the universe. This is what the scriptures are a little less clear. Even the word Maya doesn't occur in the Upanishads much. So the teachings of Maya were largely developed by Shankara and his disciples, and it is a brilliant way of understanding all of this. So how does a world of duality arise from non-dual Brahman? Ishvara, who is in essence non-dual Brahman, but when that non-dual Brahman is endowed with this creative capacity called Maya, that's who we call Ishvara. Ishvara is non-dual Brahman who is endowed with this creative capacity called Maya. Ishvara is the one who wields this creative capacity called Maya. And this is Maya from Ishvara's perspective in order to make sense out of this out of the coming verses. We need to relate it to us, to Jiva. So how can we understand this Maya from our standpoint. Turns out, and this is quite technical, but let me try to present it in a very accessible way. I think it can be presented in an accessible way. And that is to see the parallelism between Maya and avidya. And by parallelism, I mean what Maya is to Ishvara, avidya is to jiva. And that needs to be explained. There's a parallel connection. And in order to see that parallel connection, we have to understand, what is this avidya? What is ignorance? My gosh. This is a topic which is one of the most confounding topics in Advaita, not just in Advaita Vedanta, I think in all schools of philosophy. What is ignorance? And humorously, some commentators have said, trying to understand ignorance is like the fellow walking around with the lantern looking for darkness. How does that work? Because to understand avidya is to bring knowledge to bear, and knowledge destroys ignorance like light removes darkness. So I'm just illustrating a mysterious quality of ignorance. Mysterious. That's that magic meaning. So it's not the primary meaning, but it's something mysterious, something powerful, something powerful. Think of a science laboratory, and the scientist has a rope. And the scientist is doing something that we don't have this technology today, but we have this CRISPR, this gene splicing. You can kind of design your own genome. So the scientist, in the future, is going to change this rope through some genetic manipulation, going to change the rope into a snake. How would that happen? You can imagine that the technology required to convert a rope into a living snake, that kind of technology won't exist for hundreds of years, right? I mean, if it's possible at all, let's assume it's possible. One day in the future, scientists can do almost anything. So the scientist is going to convert this rope. By the way, rope is made of cotton and other organic materials, so it's not completely improbable. The rope is woven. Don't tell me about polypropylene rope and all of that. Anyway, rope is generally woven of plant material of some kind. Anyway, jute is a good example. So it's not unreasonable that our future scientists can somehow convert this rope into a snake, but really complex, right? Then how is it that walking down a dark alley, when you see a rope coiled up in a corner in a half light, you think it's a snake and you jump? Look at that. You transformed that rope into a snake. That's power. You transformed, in your mind, you transformed a rope into a snake. How does that happen? And how it happens is due to the power of avidya. Generally, we don't speak of avidya as a power. Maya we definitely see as a power, but avidya has a power in the sense that it affects you, doesn't it? So it has the power to affect you. And in fact, it has two different kinds of power that affect you in two different ways. These two kinds of power are called Shakti, power, and the two kinds of power are Avarana and Vikshepa, and I'll explain these terms in just a moment. These are the two kinds of Shakti, Avarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. These words might be unfamiliar to you. Avarana Shakti, am I still on the, yeah, good. Avarana Shakti is covering. Let me use, covering is fine. A power of covering. Vikshepa is a power of projecting. So, like Maya is a power, avidya has power over you. Avidya has avarana shakti, the power of covering in the sense of obscuring. So this avarana shakti of avidya covers the rope. The rope is not seen by you. If the rope were seen, then you wouldn't imagine a snake. So the rope is obscured by this avarana shakti, this covering capacity or covering power of avidya. That's one of the two powers of avidya. The second of the two powers of avidya is Vikshepa Shakti, the power of projection. So if you simply didn't see the rope, what would you be afraid of? Nothing. But the fact is, because you don't see the object as a rope, you project upon that rope snake. And why snake? Something you fear. This is human psychology. We have a tendency to project what we fear. So, this projection of the snake is due to Vikshepa Shakti. So you can understand, yes, this is a little technical, but it may help you a lot. And we'll bring it now to Maya in just a moment. So we can understand then avidya, ignorance, which affects you as individuals. It affects you how? Through avarana shakti, this covering power, and through vikshepa shakti, projecting power. Now, I said there's a parallel between avidya and maya. Avidya creates snakes and much more. Not only that, but if the ancient rishis were true, if the ancient rishis were correct, they taught that all this, sarvam kalvidam brahma, in Chandogya Upanishad, all this is nothing but non-dual Brahman. That's what they taught. Sarvam kalvidam Brahma. All of this is non-dual Brahman. As I said before, look for the non-duality around you. You see only duality. Why is it, if the ancient rishis discovered the non-duality of everything, then why do you see the duality? It's like, why do you see the snake? Same thing. So due to avarana shakti, the non-dual reality of what is covered, obscured. That's one aspect of avidya, is your failure to grasp the underlying non-duality because of which everything exists, and because you fail to grasp that covering aspect, preventing you from seeing, from understanding. As a result, you then project the universe of duality? Who creates duality? This is, and as I said, this is a very sophisticated topic. We'll take it lightly here, and then we'll return to our text in just a moment. So look at this. Who created that snake? You did, right? Who creates this duality? That's right. Due to ignorance, you create the duality. There was no duality for the ancient rishis. There's no duality for Krishna. There's duality for you. Why? You've created it. This is the power of avidya. And now you can see the parallelism. Due to your vikshepa shakti, you create this world of duality, and in the same way, Ishvara, with his creative capacity of Maya. The creative capacity of Maya is like the vikshepa shakti of ignorance. So the vikshepa shakti, the projecting power, like you project the snake, creating the snake out of a rope, in the same way, Ishvara, through Maya, which has that nature of projecting, in this case, projecting the universe, creating everything. Ishvara creates the universe through Maya, which is like Vikshepa Shakti, and at this point, everyone will ask, what about this? Does Ishvara have avarana? Does Ishvara have ignorance? And that's why we don't use the word avidya here. We use the word maya especially to mean that Ishvara has this projecting power. Ishvara does not have, is not affected by this covering capacity. This is the brilliance of Shankaracharya and his followers. You won't find this explanation in the Upanishads. This is a further development, a further analysis, which is powerful in that we can now understand Maya in a different way. Just as you have the power to create a snake, Ishvara has the power to create the cosmos. This is the parallelism. And you create the snake out of rope. Is there any snakeness in the rope? None whatsoever. But doesn't stop you from creating the snake in the same way. Ishvara, out of non-duality, with that power of Maya, can create the cosmos. Okay, so Sri Krishna is going to use the word Maya extensively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and like in verse after verse. So it's important we should know what this word Maya means. Now, with this understanding, let's come back and look at this verse again and understand it based on what we've just said. So Sri Krishna began by saying, Bandhaha muktaha iti vyakya, this description of people as being bound or liberated, gunataha, is from a worldly perspective, na vastutaha, not in reality. Meaning, bondage and moksha is part of the created world. The created world, which was created from non-dual Brahman, and this is going to have to be next week's class. The world, which is Ishvara's projection. And this is where the word illusion is inserted. And the reason illusion isn't good, Ishvara's projection makes sense. Ishvara's creation makes sense. The problem with the word illusion is this. Is that illusory? The word illusion doesn't fit for us. This is not illusory. This is something very much in my experience. So to call this table, this chair, that's funny. So this table has legs. This chair has legs. One more, two more legs. So the legs of this table, the legs of this chair, the legs of this Swami, all of these legs, we can't really call them illusory, but we can certainly call them Ishvara's projection, Ishvara's creation. But, and this is what we'll begin with in our next class, Ishvara's creation has some similarity to your creation. What is your creation? The snake. Ishvara's creation is a little bit like that snake. How is it like the snake? You created the snake out of rope. Ishvara created duality out of non-duality. That's the metaphor. You created the snake out of a rope. Ishvara creates duality out of non-duality, which means the snake doesn't truly exist. Duality doesn't truly exist. The snake is a projection. This world of duality is a projection, a creation, not an illusion, a projection of Ishvara due to Maya. And when we say that, it means just as the snake is not absolutely real, you experience it, but it's not absolutely real. In the same way, the world of duality in which we live, we experience it, but it's not absolutely real. If the snake is, try this. If the snake is not absolutely real, what about its fangs and its venom? Also, not absolutely real. If this world is not absolutely real, then what about bondage and moksha? You get it. Look at that. If the snake's venom and fangs are not absolutely real, the bondage and moksha in this world are not absolutely real. Which is why Sri Krishna says, "Na me mokshaha na bandhanam." For me, from my perspective, Sri Krishna being enlightened, from his enlightened perspective, bondage and moksha are not absolutely real. And just to conclude, what is the significance of this in the context of Uddhava's question? Uddhava's question, as understood by the commentator, is that suppose bondage really comes to an end, and moksha really has a beginning point in time. That's how the world works, right? So bondage and moksha, if that's really how it works, then that moksha, that liberation, will eventually come to an end. How to understand it? Sri Krishna's explanation really takes it up to an entirely different level. And that is, just like the snake is your projection, and therefore not absolutely real, the universe is Ishvara's projection, therefore not absolutely real. And just like the snake's venom and fangs are equally unreal, in the same way in the world, bondage and moksha are equally unreal. That's why Sri Krishna concludes, "Na me mokshaha na bandhanam." There is no moksha, there is no bondage. And this is a good place to conclude today. Little heavy. And this is just, the real scholar. This is fortunately this Uddhava Gita is not a scholarly text. Scholarly texts will focus on this kind of material endlessly, and it becomes quite a challenge. We won't face that kind of challenge as we continue this text. And we will continue next week. Schedule. So we have the holidays coming now. Tomorrow's New Year's Eve. Following Monday is New Year's Day. We will have no classes or programs here tomorrow on New Year's Eve. Many of you will have social occasions. And then every year on New Year's Day, we have a wonderful celebration. So we'll start at 11 o'clock. On New Year's Day, there'll be a brief puja. We'll be chanting some Shanti mantras from the Vedas, and then I'll have a New Year's message to share with you all. So please come and join us, not tomorrow, Sunday, but join us Monday at 11 o'clock for our New Year's celebration. And we'll conclude with our brief prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shrinvan Uttavasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.